Thank you, folks. As the credits roll, please welcome back the director of the film, Yael Melamede, a person you know now very, very well. It's weird, we've had Yael here many times, but I've always introduced you as the director of the film, the producer of the film, and this time you're a subject in the film. This kind of...
It was not intentional.
It's I'm sure it's a new experience for me. I'm sure it's even harder for you. But we do have another special guest in the audience. Would you like to introduce?
I'd like you all to meet Ada Carole Melamede.
Ada, thank you so much for being here with us, and don't be shy. I know you're not. Oh, we have one more shot here. Always good to have an after scene like a Marvel movie, right? It's a. There's so much wisdom in this film. Thank you for sharing this wisdom with us. What made you want to make this film?
I've produced so much more than I've directed, but I don't know. It's funny. I think in some ways one makes up why one did a film after one makes it. But I think I'm really interested in people who are completely obsessed by their work, that they find all of life's mysteries in that work, and that they also seem to solve all of the world's problems that they see through their work. The first film I did was about a behavioral scientist who was researching irrationality and dishonesty. And the next film I made, which was finished actually just a little bit before this one, was about a very famous American lawyer, Floyd Abrams, on freedom of speech, which I had the pleasure of showing here. And I just think that I'm really interested in people like that, and my mother is like that. But she also has an added part, which is she's so shy, and I feel like we don't pay attention to people like her, especially women. My mother's here, so I have to be careful.
When you told me she was coming, I was like, yeah, yay, but changes the conversation.
No, but it's interesting. I think if you ask my mother about feminism or women architects, she thinks that's a complete waste of time. And I love that she thinks that way and that it has not played a role in the way she sees her work. I think that's a tremendous freedom. But I think I can look at her and say what a feminist and what an amazing thing that she managed to do what she did in such a man's world. And I think that is also true. So I wanted to pay attention to that kind of quiet strength that is both so powerful but also so quiet.
And of course, one of the things that makes this a great documentary is that you're telling a very personal story, but managing to, I think, reach beyond it and reflecting beyond the personal into a bigger picture. Are there points that you were trying to make through this film?
Well, I always thought it was a really interesting way to talk about Israel. This film for me was not only about my mother, but about my uncle and my grandfather. They happened to all be so successful in their own field, but they all were part of building such a young country, and it was such a particular time. And for me, it was a way to think about Israel without talking about good or bad or right or wrong, but kind of the complexity and the nuance, the idealism, the broken dreams. And so I don't think I was so aware of it all along the way, but certainly once the Supreme Court was under attack, and I just felt that it was, and when we found the letter actually, and we ended with my mother saying, with me reading to her, "I hope you can find a place for this place in yourselves." I really felt that that's a little bit what I had done with the film, was to find a place for that place in myself that I wanted to share with people. I kind of wanted to dare them to find all of Israel ugly and at the same time acknowledge some of the terrible problems of the country.
And it's amazing because it's not a very political film. I mean, of course, one could say there's politics in the very end, that last chapter, but to the most part, it stays out of politics. There is, I thought, a brilliant moment when you're talking about the Supreme Court. You bring in some archival footage where the head of the Supreme Court then says how judges will come and go, and that this Supreme Court is forever. And of course, that's something that resonates today in such a strong way. And I know that this continues in Israel to be something that's extremely profound. How has Israel responded to this film?
In Israel, it's been amazing. I mean, we premiered the film at the Jerusalem Film Festival last summer. It was amazing. Mr. Grabelski from the Quarry was there. There were all kinds of artisans who'd worked with my mother for years who were there. It was beautifully, beautifully received. And then it went on to the Israeli TV to Yes, and somebody said to me that they'd seen on their screen that it was playing above White Lotus, and they thought that was amazing. So that was. I don't think that'll happen again. But outside of Israel is much more complicated. I don't know how much you're aware, but really there's kind of a silent boycott of all Israeli films right now. It's very difficult. This film, which should have had a very vibrant life on the festival circuit, has not. It has not shown at a single festival in Europe. And more recently, and you don't know this, but we were solicited to join a festival. We were accepted at a festival, and that invitation was recently rescinded because the festival, the people who ran the festival said that their sponsors were too nervous given the current political situation.
It's an extremely dangerous film you're showing here.
It's really dangerous.
It makes people very nervous. Ada, I hope you know you make people nervous.
And there's been one protest. The film's trailer showed in LA in front of another film and was booed. And you know, I come from a family where we honor criticism probably more than praise, and I'm in for it. I think you can criticize this film for lots of reasons, even political ones, but especially having done a film about freedom of speech before this, I find it galling from an intellectual level, an artistic level, a political level, that people don't watch the content before dismissing it. And I think it's a very dangerous time.
So I'll give the plug there and say, remind the audience that it opens this weekend at the Angelica, and everyone you know should go and see this film, and everyone you don't know. So help spread the word.
If you take your phone and take a picture of that, it'll allow you to share the information. But I will say, you know, independent film in general is having such a struggle, and films with Jewish and Israeli content even more so. So it really is an act of support, whether it's this film or others, to come see them. If you can't see them, buy a ticket anyway. Again, not only to our film, but other films. It really is about supporting cinema in general. So if you have any compunction to that, please tell anyone you can to come join us at the Angelica. Come see it again. But it really is an important support of the arts.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll ask two more questions, then we'll open it to questions from the audience. One is, what are the reactions of the audience? And I mean, you know, when you make a film, you don't know, you're obviously deeply involved in this film, more so than most filmmakers are with their films. You don't know what the reaction's going to be, but you have your intention of what you want the audience to get from this film, and then there's the surprises of what they get to the film. So from the film, so what are some of the? What was your intention, and what were some of the surprises?
I don't know if I really knew how people would react. I don't. Maybe you can tell how related we are. I don't know that I expected it to resonate so emotionally for people. And I've often said to my mother, somebody called and said they were so moved, and she's like, "What were they so moved by?" So I think that has been surprising. I think growing up with my mother, I always thought she was an amazing architect, and I loved her work, and I knew she was an amazing teacher. I don't think I quite understood until the film got released. One, to what extent she was an extraordinary teacher. The number of That's been a beautiful surprise. Is Ada's former students in New York are all kind of coming out and saying, we've been meaning to send you this letter for 20 years about what an impact you had on me as a student, and that's been extraordinary. And then also how meaningful it's been for people to see her work and for people to discover this architect they knew nothing about, who never got published outside of, really almost at all outside of Israel.
Can I ask your mother's reaction? Ada, can I ask you for your reaction to the film?
Michal, I'm sorry.
I'm Yael, not Michal.
That happens all the time.
No, I think Yael is doing a very good, show out of this whole thing, and I couldn't do better. So maybe I should be, just quiet. It's good enough.
No, but I always out her on this, that when we finished the film, before kind of, doing the final sound work and the color work, I felt I owed it to my mother to show it to her. I hadn't shown it to her at all during the making of the film. I didn't want to know what she thought, and all she cared about was if the buildings looked good. And so I showed it to her, and we finished, and there was this pause, and then I looked and I said, "What do you think?" And she looked at me with such amazement. She said, "I can't believe it's not boring." And since then, it's actually interesting. I will say I've watched it many times, and I sat through one or two of the early showings. I looked at it today because there was actually something we changed in the film in terms of subtitles, and I needed to watch it. And it's the first time I've sat next to my mother while watching the film, which was a really interesting experience. I've usually sat like 2 or 3 seats apart. So that was quite wonderful. But in the times that she's seen it, since then, people will say to her, "It's such a beautiful film." And she says to me, "You made such a beautiful film." And I say, "It's about you." And she says, "It has nothing to do with that."
Modesty is another virtue. Let's take some questions from the audience. We'd love... We're going to pass the microphone around here. Watch your toes.
Thank you for such a beautiful film. I think what was so brilliant was, you look at Architect of being very strong, and you brought the humanity of your mother and your family, and thank you for sharing that. And I was going to ask, what your mother thought of it, but she's here. But did you have to persuade her to allow you to film her?
She wasn't the most willing subject. But I think... I've said this before, but I worked with such a wonderful editor, and one of the nicest things, her name's Sharon Yaish, and she's actually supposed to arrive tomorrow. But towards the end of the process, we watched a cut of the film, and she was quiet for a minute, and she looked at me and she said, "I can't remember the last time I saw a film, or I can't remember a film in which I saw a mother-daughter relationship that was so filled with mutual respect." And I thought it was a really beautiful comment, because she didn't say love, and I think there's tons of love between us, but I think that mutual respect is really different, and maybe that is the result of living apart so much. I don't know, I think, so there was this enormous respect when I said, "I really want to do this," she said, "Okay." And I also felt like I had a tremendous obligation to try and do it right, and she felt she had an obligation to me, and I think that was beautiful. But I could have made a whole film of the times she said, "You're wasting your time. I don't know why you're doing this." Sorry.
It's a really beautiful film, and of course the title made me think of My Architect, and I was curious what, if any, influence or thoughts you had, because it's such an entirely different documentary, but there is this sort of like emotional heart to it that is both very beautiful and very complicated.
So My Architect was the first documentary I ever worked on. I was a co-producer on that film, and I knew when I was an architect, Lou Kahn was probably my favorite architect. I knew a lot about him, and my mother had met him many times, and my grandfather had met him, and my uncle had met him. So and he'd been to our house. Not that I remembered that, but I felt like I had a real knowledge of his work. And when I met Nathaniel, I really thought it was so many films about architecture are incredibly boring, and so I was not interested in a film about architecture, but I thought he was making a film that was a son looking for his father. But I knew a lot about the architecture, and I felt like maybe I could be helpful in that respect. And I think in the end, what's beautiful about that film, which was a lesson, I think, to filmmakers in general, is that by going through the personal, you get to something so profound that is also professional. And so many people learned about architecture through that film, through his search for his father. And I think that was true here, although I had the great benefit of my mother being alive. So there's such a poetry to the way she speaks about architecture that you learn about architecture through how she speaks about it, but you learn so much about life, and that architecture is like another language, another way to look at life. So it had an influence. I don't know that I would have thought of it in the same way if it hadn't been for that film.
We'll take one more down here. Oh, you got one there, and then we'll take one here.
I really wasn't going to say anything. I think it's a fantastic film, but I think that it could have another subhead, and it's My Mother, the Philosopher, because I do feel that, first, I did learn a lot about architecture in this film, but the philosophy behind everything is so deep and so strong and so admirable that I just want to congratulate you both on it.
You had a question too.
Well, my question was, what made you decide to pivot from being an architect to being a filmmaker?
I really said it in the film. I didn't find my way. I think I never felt quite comfortable. I think in part there were just the role models in front of me were so good, but I didn't find my language. I think the time and first of all, when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I did not go to architecture school because it was in my family, and it is in my blood, but I didn't do it. It wasn't something that I was leaning towards. But I discovered photography in college, and then I felt after working in photography for a while, I wanted to be in something where the shutter was longer for longer. And I applied to film school and to architecture school, and I got into architecture school, and I did not get into film school. And so I went to architecture school, and I think it's an amazing discipline. I'm really glad to have had the education. I'm really glad to have been able to work with my mother. But I think it wasn't, I really didn't find my way.
And everyone else has been addressing the large picture and philosophy and life and architecture is life. And I'm going with precision in for something that you just said. What was it that you changed in the subtitle? Was it politically motivated, or was it something that your mother had issue with, or something you just thought audiences wouldn't connect to?
I love it. This is going to be like the most comedic response. It was the height of the subtitles. But I will say that we, if you were to watch the Israeli version and the American version, there is a small change between them, and it is political. We used a word that for American audiences we used the word settle, the land, and it was so triggering that even though in the context, in the way it's said in Hebrew, it does not have that connotation at all. When it was said in English, it just did. and so that was changed a long time ago, and so we did change that.
Yael, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'm going to remind you once
And
again,
thank
folks.
you so much. Yeah, please tell everybody you know.
It opens in theaters. I want to give a big thank you to the Jerusalem Foundation for sponsoring this event, and they welcome you upstairs in the lobby for a reception. Please join us and continue the discussion. Thank you very much. Have a good night.